Most people try to fix their mind when they're awake. That's the mistake. I didn't realize how much overthinking was controlling my life until I noticed how tired my mind felt before my body ever did. I wasn't physically exhausted. I wasn't even busy all the time, but my head never stopped. Conversations replayed themselves. Decisions echoed long after they were made. Small problems expanded into imagined futures that never happened. And the worst part was this feeling that I was always on. Even when I was resting, my mind wasn't. I tried everything people usually recommend. What finally changed everything wasn't doing more during the day. It was what I stopped doing before sleep. That sounds small, almost disappointing. But it was the first time my mind actually began to rewire itself, instead of just calming. Here's something most people never hear. Your mind doesn't learn when you're trying to control it. It learns when it's unguarded. That's why overthinking is so hard to fix while you're awake. During the day, your identity is active. Your ego is defending itself. Your attention is scattered. You're reacting to stimuli non-stop. At night, that guard drops, and that's where most people waste the opportunity. I used to go to sleep scrolling, consuming random content, letting other people's thoughts be the last thing my mind absorbed. Then I wondered why my anxiety felt automatic. One night, I came across a comment under a video about Stoicism and mental discipline. Someone said it helped them retrain their mind while they slept. At first I dismissed it. It sounded vague, almost too simple, but I noticed something important. They didn't say it helped them relax. They said it helped them retrain. That word stayed with me. Training implies repetition, structure, direction, not force. So I decided to treat my mind the way disciplined people treat their body. Not with intensity, with consistency. I stopped asking how to shut my thoughts off. And I started asking a different question. What thoughts do I want running when I'm not watching? Because whether you choose them or not, something will be running. That's the uncomfortable truth. Your mind trains itself every night anyway. Most people just let it train on chaos. Here's what I changed. Before sleep, I stopped consuming anything that triggered reaction. News, social media, messages, even music with emotional pull. Instead, I gave my mind one stable idea to sit with. Not affirmations, not hype. Simple principles. Statements that didn't require agreement or resistance. Things like acceptance of uncertainty, impermanence, control over action, not outcome. Stoic ideas work here because they're emotionally neutral. They don't spike dopamine. They don't demand belief. They just sit there. And that's exactly what the subconscious likes. The first few nights felt strange. My mind tried to pull away. It wanted stimulation. It wanted drama, but I didn't fight it. I let the thought play quietly, the same way you let background noise fade. After about a week, something changed, not dramatically, subtly. I woke up without the usual mental rush. The replay loop wasn't there. Problems still existed, but they felt smaller, more distant. I hadn't fixed overthinking. I had weakened its default grip. That's when I understood something most people miss. Overthinking isn't a habit of thought. It's a habit of attention. Your mind goes where it's been trained to go when you're not directing it. Daytime effort is weak compared to nighttime imprinting. That's why willpower fails. You can't out-effort a pattern that's being reinforced unconsciously. What worked was repetition without emotion. I didn't tell myself to stop thinking. I didn't try to suppress anything. I just gave my mind fewer directions and better raw material. Over time, the noise lost priority. Here's another thing no one talks about. If this kind of mental clarity is something you want to build long-term, not just feel for a moment, you'll want to stay here. This channel is focused on discipline, control, and training the mind quietly. Not motivation, not hype. Subscribe if that resonates. The people who seem mentally calm aren't controlling their thoughts all day. They've trained what thoughts show up by default. That training happens when the mind is passive, which means sleep is not rest. It's programming. Once I saw that, I became protective of that window. I stopped using sleep as escape. I started using it as alignment. And here's where it gets interesting. The more I stopped feeding my mind stimulation at night, the less it craved distraction during the day. Overthinking thrives on excess input. Silence starves it. Not forced silence, chosen simplicity. This isn't about becoming emotionless or detached from life. It's about removing unnecessary friction from your mental environment. Stoicism works not because it's ancient, but because it's minimal. No fantasies, no catastrophizing, no obsession with control. Just action, acceptance, and restraint. After a few weeks, decisions became faster. Not because I was smarter, but because fewer thoughts were competing. That's real clarity, and clarity doesn't come from effort. It comes from subtraction. If you're listening to this and overthinking still feels automatic, it's not because you're broken, it's because your mind is still being trained on noise. Change the input when your guard is down, and the output changes when you wake up. That's how discipline actually works. Quietly, consistently, without drama. Once I noticed that shift, I stopped chasing techniques and started paying attention to patterns. Not motivational patterns, biological ones. I realized that my worst overthinking episodes always had the same origin. Too much input with no resolution. Conversations without closure. Information without action. Stimulation without purpose. My mind wasn't broken, it was overloaded. During the day, I learned to function inside that overload. At night, I let it continue. That's what most people don't do. They think sleep is an off switch. It's not. It's a continuation. Whatever direction your mind is pointed toward before sleep, it keeps walking that way when you're unconscious. That's why people wake up anxious without knowing why. The work was already done while they weren't watching. Once I understood that, I stopped trying to relax my mind at night. Relaxation is passive. Training is intentional. I began treating the last 30 minutes before sleep as a boundary, not a ritual, a filter. Anything that pulled my attention outward was cut. No arguments, no exceptions. Even things I enjoyed had to go if they triggered reactions. At first, it felt empty. My mind kept reaching for stimulation like a reflex. That urge alone told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't addicted to thinking. I was addicted to input. So instead of filling that space, I reduced it. I let my mind sit with fewer options. One idea, one principle, sometimes just a sentence, sometimes nothing at all. Just awareness of breath and posture. Not to calm myself down, to stop feeding the noise. What surprised me was how quickly my mind adapted once it realized nothing new was coming. Thoughts slowed, not because I forced them to, but because they had nothing to attach to. Overthinking needs hooks. When you remove the hooks, it loses leverage. After a few more nights, something else became clear. The thoughts that kept repeating were always the same category. Control fantasies, regret loops, future rehearsals. None of them required action. They only required attention. So I stopped giving them emotional weight. I didn't argue with them. I didn't suppress them. I treated them like background static. That neutrality was the real training. Stoicism fits perfectly here because it doesn't try to replace one thought with another. It removes the importance from unnecessary ones. No resistance, no attachment, just observation and release. That approach spilled into my days. I noticed that when overthinking tried to start, it felt weaker, less convincing, almost lazy. The habit hadn't disappeared, but its authority had. That's when I realized overthinking survives on urgency. Everything feels important when your mind has been trained to react. When you remove urgency at night, the daytime mind follows. Not immediately, gradually, and that gradual shift is what makes it sustainable. I wasn't becoming numb or detached from life. I was becoming selective. Selective attention creates space. Space creates clarity. Most people never experience that because their mind is constantly occupied with borrowed problems, news, opinions, comparisons, hypotheticals. None of it belongs to them, yet it lives rent-free in their head. When I stopped letting that content be the last thing my mind consumed before sleep, my baseline changed. I didn't wake up motivated, I woke up clear. That difference matters. Motivation fades, clarity compounds. The more nights I protected that window, the more predictable my mental state became. And predictability is freedom. You don't have to fight your mind when you know how it will behave. That's when overthinking stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like a leftover habit that no longer fits the environment you've created. By the end of this phase, I wasn't trying to silence my thoughts anymore. I was shaping the conditions where only the useful ones survived. That's the real discipline, not control through force, control through environment. And once you understand that, the next step becomes obvious. It's not about what you think. It's about what you allow your mind to rehearse when you're not conscious enough to intervene. That's where the deeper change happens. And that's where the next chapter goes. Once I understood that rehearsal was the real issue, everything became simpler. Not easier, but simpler. I stopped trying to manage thoughts as they appeared. That approach always felt exhausting, like standing in traffic trying to redirect every car by hand. Instead, I focused on what the mind practiced when I wasn't paying attention, because that's what shows up under pressure. Most people think their reactions are spontaneous. They're not. They're rehearsed, quietly, repeatedly, usually at night. That's why willpower fails in moments that matter. You don't rise to the level of your intentions. You fall to the level of what you've practiced unconsciously. Once I saw that, I stopped asking how to think better. I asked how to rehearse less. Overthinking isn't a sign of intelligence. It's a sign of over-preparation for imaginary scenarios. The mind keeps running simulations because it believes danger is unresolved. And as long as it believes that, it won't let go. So instead of trying to reassure myself, I removed the stage. No more mental rehearsals. No more future scripting before sleep. No more replaying conversations to fix them. I didn't forbid these thoughts. I made them boring. I let them run without emotional fuel. No judgment, no urgency, no meaning attached. At first, they tried harder. That's normal. Habits always resist extinction, but without reaction, they lost momentum. This is where people usually get it wrong. They think the goal is calm. It isn't. The goal is neutrality. Calm is a state. Neutrality is a position. Neutrality doesn't fight thoughts. It doesn't follow them either. It lets them pass without registering importance. That's why positivity doesn't work long-term. It creates resistance. The mind argues back. Neutrality ends the conversation. Stoicism taught me this better than anything else. Not because it's wise or ancient, but because it's practical. It doesn't ask you to feel better. It asks you to see things clearly. And clarity removes the need for rehearsal. Once I stopped rehearsing mentally, something unexpected happened. My sleep deepened, not because I was relaxed, but because my mind had fewer unresolved loops to keep open. I woke up without the urge to immediately check something. There was no mental itch demanding attention. That silence felt unfamiliar at first, almost uncomfortable. But that discomfort was the sound of a habit dying. During the day, I noticed another shift. When uncertainty showed up, my mind didn't rush to fill it. It paused. That pause is everything. Overthinking lives in the space between stimulus and reaction. When that space expands, overthinking loses control. I didn't become slower. I became more precise. Decisions felt lighter because they weren't carrying imaginary consequences. I also stopped explaining myself so much, to others and to myself. Explanations are often a form of mental rehearsal, a way to preempt judgment that hasn't to ball yet. When you stop rehearsing, you stop justifying. That alone changes how people respond to you. There was one more thing I had to accept. Some thoughts never disappear completely. They just stop being relevant. The goal isn't a silent mind. It's a mind that knows what to ignore. That discernment only comes from repeated neutrality. Night after night, I gave my mind the same message. Nothing needs to be solved right now. Nothing needs to be replayed. Nothing needs to be prepared for. And slowly, the mind learned, not intellectually, behaviorally. It stopped offering unnecessary thoughts because they no longer produced engagement. That's how habits end, not with force, with disinterest. By the end of this phase, overthinking didn't feel like an enemy anymore. It felt like an outdated reflex, something that made sense once, but no longer fit the environment I had built. That's when I realized this wasn't about stopping thoughts. It was about ending rehearsals. And once rehearsals end, clarity becomes the default. Not because you earned it, but because there's nothing left competing with it. That's where this chapter closes. And the next shift goes even deeper, because once the mind stops rehearsing fear, it starts rehearsing something else, presence, and that changes everything. When presence started to replace rehearsal, I noticed something subtle but undeniable. My mind stopped racing ahead of reality. I wasn't predicting conversations before they happened. I wasn't replaying mistakes after they passed. I was meeting moments as they arrived, instead of dragging mental baggage into them. At first, this felt unfamiliar, almost exposed. Overthinking creates the illusion of protection. It convinces you that if you analyze enough, nothing will surprise you. When that habit fades, there's a brief sense of vulnerability, but that vulnerability didn't last. What replaced it was something far more stable, precision. I began responding instead of reacting. Words came out cleaner. Decisions took less effort. Not because I had fewer options, but because fewer of them felt necessary. Presence doesn't make you passive, it makes you exact. I noticed this most clearly in situations that used to trigger spirals, difficult conversations, uncertainty, waiting. Before, waiting felt unbearable. My mind would fill the space with imagined outcomes, preparing for all of them at once. Now, waiting was just waiting, no story attached. That alone removed an enormous amount of internal pressure. Here's something I didn't expect. The less I rehearsed mentally, the more capable I felt in real time. Overthinking had been draining confidence, not creating it. Every mental rehearsal was a reminder that I didn't trust myself to handle reality as it came. Presence restored that trust. I stopped asking, what if this goes wrong? I started assuming, I'll handle it when it happens. That shift wasn't emotional, it was structural. When your mind isn't busy simulating threats, it has more bandwidth for perception. You notice tone, timing, context, subtle cues you used to miss while lost in thought. That's where real control comes from, not controlling outcomes, controlling attention. Another thing changed quietly. My need to explain myself disappeared. Overthinking often disguises itself as preparation, but it's usually defense, a way to preempt judgment. When presence became my default, I didn't feel the urge to justify actions that hadn't been questioned. Silence became comfortable, not empty silence, grounded silence. People respond to that. I noticed conversations slowing down around me. Others filled the space instead of me. Decisions felt less rushed. There was more room to choose instead of reacts. Presence creates gravity, not because it's impressive, but because it's rare. Most people are somewhere else, mentally, planning, remembering, comparing, rehearsing. When you're actually there, it's felt. I also realized that presence made discipline easier, not harder. Before, discipline felt like force. resisting impulses, managing distractions, fighting habits. Now, many impulses never appeared. Discipline became a byproduct of clarity. When the mind is quiet, distractions lose their appeal. There's nothing they're interrupting. This is where people usually ask for techniques, but techniques are what I stopped chasing. The presence isn't maintained through effort, it's maintained through environment. I protected my inputs, not obsessively, selectively. I became ruthless about what entered my attention, especially at night, because I knew that whatever passed through that gate would shape the next day, not immediately, but inevitably. I also stopped measuring progress by how calm I felt. Calm comes and goes. What stayed consistent was stability. Even on difficult days, my mind didn't spiral. It stayed near the problem instead of running ahead of it. That's real progress. Presence doesn't eliminate difficulty. It prevents amplification. By the end of this phase, overthinking felt like something I remembered doing, not something I was actively fighting. It lost urgency. It lost authority. And that's when I understood the final lesson of this chapter. The goal was never to think less. It was to stop letting thought replace experience. Once experience leads again, thought finds its proper place. As a tool, not a master. That's where chapter 4 settles. Not in silence for its own sake, but in presence strong enough that silence no longer feels necessary. And the final chapter goes beyond the mind entirely. Because once presence is stable, the question isn't how to think. It's how to live without constantly negotiating with your own thoughts. That's where everything integrates. And that's where this story is heading next. Once presence stopped feeling like something I had to maintain, life itself began to change texture, not in obvious ways. No sudden confidence, no dramatic sense of peace. What changed was how little negotiation happened inside me. I wasn't asking my mind for permission before acting anymore. I wasn't prucking in with imaginary futures before making small decisions. I simply moved. That's when I realized something important. Most exhaustion doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from deciding too much. Every time you argue with yourself internally, you burn energy. Every time you rehearse, justify, or anticipate reactions, you create friction that has nothing to do with reality. When that friction disappeared, I had more capacity without changing my schedule. I didn't optimize my life. I removed resistance from it. Daily actions became simpler, not because they were easy, but because they were uncontested. I woke up and did what needed to be done, without commentary. No internal debate, no mental build-up. That quiet decisiveness was new, and it spread. Difficult tasks lost their emotional weight. Conversations didn't feel like performances. Even rest felt cleaner, because it wasn't compensating for mental fatigue. I noticed I was less reactive to people, not indifferent, unhooked. Criticism landed without echo. Praise passed through without attachment. I didn't need to protect an identity anymore, because I wasn't narrating one internally. Presence had dissolved the storyteller. That's when real integration began. Not the kind people talk about online, the practical kind. I could feel stress without becoming it. I could notice anxiety without amplifying it. Emotions showed up and left like weather. That's when I understood that the mind hadn't been the problem. The identification with it was. Once that identification loosened, everything felt more proportional. Problems stayed problems. They didn't become identities. I also stopped needing systems. Routines simplified themselves. Habits stabilized without force. When your attention isn't fragmented, consistency becomes natural. You don't need motivation to do what feels obvious. That's the quiet payoff. No one advertises. Presence doesn't make life perfect. It makes it direct. By the end of this phase, I wasn't practicing anything consciously. I wasn't doing the work anymore. The work had dissolved into how I moved through the day, and that's where the 5th chapter closes, with the realization that freedom isn't a mental state. It's the absence of unnecessary inner friction. The 6th chapter begins where most people expect everything to fall apart. Pressure, because it's easy to feel present when life is calm. The real question is what happens when things tighten. Deadlines, conflict, uncertainty, stakes. I used to believe pressure would bring the old patterns back, that stress would reawaken overthinking, rehearsal, and control fantasies. It didn't. Pressure revealed something else. Presence isn't fragile. It's adaptive. Under pressure, my mind didn't scatter. It narrowed. Attention became sharper, not louder. There was less commentary, not more. I realized that overthinking had never been preparation for pressure. It had been avoidance of it. When pressure arrived, there was no choice but to respond. And response didn't require thought in the way I used to think it did. It required perception. I trusted myself in moments that used to trigger panic, not because I felt brave, but because there was no alternative narrative competing for attention. Action became immediate. This is where people misunderstand calmness. They think calm means slow. It doesn't. It means unblocked. When nothing inside is arguing, response time shortens. Decisions land cleanly. Even mistakes resolve faster because they aren't dragged into identity. I noticed that other people reacted differently to me under pressure. They leaned in, they waited, they trusted, not because I was dominating situations, but because I wasn't adding noise to them. Presence under pressure communicates competence without display. That's rare. I also learned when to disengage. Not everything requires response. Not every tension deserves participation. Presence gives you the clarity to step back without fear of missing something important. Urgency lost its power over me, not because I ignored responsibility, but because I stopped confusing urgency with importance. That distinction alone changed my life. The final realization of this chapter was the simplest one. I wasn't managing my mind anymore. I was living from something deeper than it. Thought still existed. Planning still happened. Analysis still had a role. But none of it was in charge. The mind became a tool again. And tools don't argue with the hand that uses them. That's where this journey actually ends. Not with control, not with silence, not with discipline as force, but with alignment between attention and action, between perception and response, between who I am and what I do. Overthinking didn't disappear because I defeated it. It disappeared because it was no longer needed. And when something is no longer needed, it fades quietly, without resistance, without drama. That's the real end of the story, not a breakthrough, a return. At this point, nothing new needs to happen. There is no problem left to solve, no pattern left to correct, no effort required. The mind already knows how to rest. What remains now is permission. Permission to stop monitoring experience. Permission to stop checking thoughts as they appear. Permission to let awareness settle on its own. Nothing is being lost in this moment. Control is not leaving. Clarity is not fading. Attention is simply loosening its grip. The mind does not need direction right now. It does not need guidance. It does not need improvement. It can remain open without effort. Thoughts may appear. They may fade. They do not require response. There is no urgency attached to them. They are not signals. They are not instructions. They are just movement. And movement does not require participation. The body already understands how to sleep. Breathing continues without supervision. The balance maintains itself naturally. The same is true for the mind. Nothing needs to be held together. Awareness can widen. It can soften. It can rest without collapsing. There is no edge to reach, no state to maintain, no outcome to achieve. This moment is complete as it is. The mind does not need to prepare for tomorrow. Tomorrow will arrive on its own. There is no benefit in rehearsing it now. Rehearsal can stop. Attention can drift without consequence. If thoughts slow, that is fine. If thoughts continue, that is also fine. Both lead in the same direction. There is nothing here to resist. The mind is allowed to be quiet. It is also allowed to be empty. Silence does not mean absence. It means space, and space does not need to be filled. Awareness does not disappear when activity fades. It becomes simpler, less defined, less focused, more open. This openness is safe. Nothing needs to be guarded. Nothing needs to be remembered. The sense of doing can soften. The sense of watching can soften as well. Eventually, even that can dissolve, not through effort, through natural settling, like water becoming still when it is no longer disturbed. The mind does not need to understand this. Understanding is not required. Rest does not depend on explanation. It arrives when there is nothing left to manage, nothing left to fix, nothing left to hold. And in that absence of effort, sleep comes naturally, not as an action, not as a goal, but as a continuation,